We're using our birthday to divide us instead of trying to heal us during this period. It would have been so easy to say, let's put the divisions aside, just like, down in Louisiana we do with birthday parties with relatives we don't fully agree with. You put the divisions aside and say we have certain values, we share them, we share the values of the Declaration of Independence. Let's read the Declaration instead of doing what they're doing here.
Walter, on that point, I remember the bicentennial celebration.
You and I are old enough?
Right, we were both old enough. And on that point, there's always been, as we celebrate these kinds of occasions, where Americans approached them differently because we were at different places. Blacks were enslaved, women couldn't vote, but we found that we could find common ground in celebrating the progress of America. Here, you're having a president that is bent more on, in many ways, cementing the divisions, us against them, making it all about him. Talk to us about how the spirit that comes out of the president in these middle of the night kind of truth socials and others is counter to really trying to celebrate what we could celebrate, even though we were at different vantage points 250 years ago when the Declaration was signed.
I think it's on us to do that. In some ways, as you say, President Trump keeps trying to make it about himself, whether he's the headliner of the rally or his name is on the Kennedy Center, whatever it may be. We got to get him out of our head. We got to celebrate our 250th and not make it about him. So even as you ask the question, how much is it about Trump? We should just say no. And it's probably going to happen. I've been all over the country because I've done this book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. It's a small book about the Declaration. And whether I'm in Austin or Chattanooga or Cleveland or Columbus or New Orleans or Atlanta, people want to celebrate in their communities the values we share. So I think we probably have to just filter out some of what's coming out of Washington.
Caddy, I know this anniversary is a sore subject for you, but I think it's so unsurprising that President Trump would make this about himself. He is, I'd argue, of all of our presidents, the one who has seemed least interested in leading all the people. He runs, he supports, he's the president of his voters, of his base, of his party. And sadly, in what should be, to Walter's point, a moment of unity, instead, he is using it to make it about himself and, frankly, further our divisions.
Yeah, I mean, John, like the Rev and Walter, I am old enough as well to remember the bicentennial. I was a child living in Saudi Arabia, and I remember being invited to the American Embassy, which I loved because you had hamburgers and air conditioning, which we did not, and Coca-Cola. But it was a celebration of America. I mean, that was a time, the 1970s in the Middle East, where America could do no wrong. I mean, you were the guys with the money, you were the guys with the power. And now I think about America's reputation in the Middle East in the middle of this ill-advised adventure into Iran, and so much has been squandered in terms of America's reputation around the world. From 200 to 250, this looks like a very different country from other countries' point of view. But, David, you've been writing something similar to this. Your latest piece for the New York Times is titled, "The Fire of Stupidity Cannot Be Contained," and you write in part this: "It is no coincidence that authoritarianism is once again appealing to people at a time when two things are happening at once. Liberal democracies are struggling to meet the needs of a substantial portion of their citizens, and entire generations have come of age with no living memory of the totalitarian horrors of the 20th century. In other words, millions upon millions of people are enduring democracy as the worst form of government, without the necessary balanced understanding that citizens in the mid-20th century had gained through first-hand observation of accept all those other forms that have been tried. In their frustration, all too many people are attracted to the theoretical benefits of authoritarianism, and they don't have the experience or the education to understand its actual and inevitable defects." It's a super interesting way of framing it, David, and I wonder how you put the defeat of Viktor Orban in this context. I hear what you're saying, but I also look at the way that authoritarian regime failed to deliver for people and was basically given 10 years. And after 10 years, if you can't deliver for people, if you're too corrupt and there's no economic growth, they threw Orban out of office. And could that be the kind of silver lining in this project, that authoritarian regimes don't deliver for their people, and so their people take, if they can, the chance to get rid of them?
Yeah, well, the people of Hungary went further down that road of authoritarianism than even we've gone yet. And when they got further down that road, they started to experience all those negative effects from history. They started to experience the corruption that we see, for example, in the Trump administration. They started to feel the isolation. They began to see how authoritarianism sort of has utopian promises. It always over-promises and it under-delivers. So they went through kind of some hard-earned experience that we're having right now. And I do think, and you are beginning to see these opinion polls where just that steady decline of Trump indicates that the people are rejecting it. The problem we keep having, though, is we just keep having to walk right into these experiences rather than learning the lessons of history. If we knew the lessons of history, that Trumpian authoritarianism wouldn't have been so appealing to such a large percentage of Americans. But we've forgotten those lessons. We've forgotten them again and again. And it's like we're walking through, as I said in the column, a museum of wretched ideas, where you've got all of these bad ideas at once from the 20th century just coming back down upon us, from tariffs to Gilded Age corruption to young people flirting with communism and fascism to anti-Semitism hovering over it all, while Europe is in a land war, the Middle East is in turmoil. And you just ask, how many of these really bad ideas are we going to be trying again over the next few years until we finally snap to our senses?
David, it's Walter Isaacson. Let me ask you about what may be the underlying causes of some of this embrace of authoritarianism and rejection of democracy. And I would posit that over the past 40, 50 years, we did an era of liberal democracy that involved global trade, free movements of people, free movements of capital, offshoring of jobs, and we said it would create great wealth. And we were right. It created great wealth. But it totally gutted a working class from Hungary to England to the United States, and it didn't deliver. It just led to disparities of wealth. To what extent is it on us, with liberal democracy believing in globalization, that we got it fundamentally wrong for what that would do to a middle and working class?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things can be true at once here. Number one, it's absolutely clear that millions upon millions of people, not just in the U.S., this is globally, look at liberal democracy and say it isn't delivering on its promises to me. That is something that is absolutely true. It is also true, though, that liberal democracy is always going to be messy. It's always going to involve compromises. It's always going to involve democratic outcomes where one side doesn't forever and ever vanquish its opponents. You always have to accommodate your opponents in a liberal democracy. So it ends up being very messy. So we have trouble holding these two things in our minds at once. We can do better, and it will never be perfect. The problem you have with a lot of the authoritarians is they are promising something that they cannot deliver. They are promising to correct all the problems of liberal democracy. They are promising that they could do something better, and they cannot. And what we're trying to do is correct our democracy without sliding into the failed ideas of the past. And that is, I think, one of the fundamental challenges of our time.
David French, let's turn to events in Washington this week. The Congress returns to D.C., and it comes at a moment where there has been, and I don't want to overstate this, that there's not a Republican revolt against Donald Trump, but there has been some noticeable pushback, particularly in the Senate, in recent days. I wrote about it at the end of last week. Though Trump has increased his hold on the party in many ways, including backing, the primary candidates that he backs win. He has ousted a lot of the dissenters in the party, with John Cornyn being the latest. But he's also really, frankly, angered many Republicans in the upper chamber who the reason why they were on recess last week is they went home early because they refused, after the Cornyn matter, they refused to take up the weaponization fund. They've put some roadblocks in front of the ballroom funding. What are you seeing here? Is this just a blip and, like so many have been before, and largely the party will come back to him? Or do you think there'll be even a small degree of independence from the Senate who might, for the first time, be starting to look beyond President Trump's reign?
I think you're going to see the latter, and I'm glad you said small degree of independence. Again, the people have been looking for this dramatic break for a long time, and you're going to keep looking. But small degree of independence, yeah, I think you're going to begin to see it. And the reason why is that there's a very important distinction that a lot of these senators are very aware of that has been sort of underplayed in the public, and that is Trump turned on senators who had in many ways been doing everything that they could to signal their loyalty to Trump. I mean, Senator Cornyn, in the days before the Paxton endorsement, had been working time and time again to demonstrate his loyalty to Trump. Now, the thing that was very clear is that it's 100% loyalty or nothing for Trump, because he took on senators who had broken with him in some important ways in the past. So, for example, Senator Cornyn voting to certify the election. But again and again, you were not talking about senators who had defied Trump all over the place, or senators who were defying Trump all the time, just very rarely, very selectively. And so they're now learning that to be with Trump, it's 100%, or you're going to have a target on your back. It is holding a standard that is dangerous for them, or there's a political target on their back. And so this is infuriating. It's frustrating. It's demonstrating that often loyalty is a moving target. And I do think that frustration is going to spill over in some important ways.
That loyalty also being a one-way street. But by Trump's, purges here, he has potentially hurt his ability to get things done if the Republicans revolt, but also hurt the GOP's ability, potentially, to hold on to the Senate this November, adding to his increasingly lame duck status.